The cold Korean mafia boss who rejected all until he saved a black girl from her husband. A muffled cry echoed from the alley beside the Diamond Club. Shadows moved against brick walls. Hushed threats. Desperate pleas. This is how their story began. Not with gentle introductions or faded meetings, but with fear, with desperation, with a moment that would change everything. Jae-ho Kim stood in the darkness, observing the scene unfold. A man gripping a woman's arm so tightly it had to hurt, his words harsh and threatening. Her face streaked with tears, designer dress torn at the shoulder. But it wasn't her distress that caught Jae-ho's attention. It was her eyes, defiant, burning. A woman being intimidated but whose spirit refused to bend. He shouldn't have cared. The dragon of Gangnam had built his empire on not caring. Had risen from the gutters of Busan to rule Seoul's underworld precisely because he'd learned to silence whatever conscience he might have once possessed. The woman was nothing to him. Another story in a city of millions. Another problem he could easily walk away from. And yet, his feet moved before his mind decided. One moment he was a spectator, the next an intervener. His hand closed around the man's wrist, applying just enough pressure to make him release the woman. The gun appeared at his side like an extension of his arm, never raised but its presence unmistakable. "I suggest you reconsider your actions," Jae-ho said, his voice the same emotionless tone he used to order coffee or command his empire. The woman gasped, clutching her arm where red marks were already forming. American, black, beautiful despite her distress. A stranger in a country that saw her as perpetually foreign. "Please," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Don't hurt him. Mercy." From the victim, not the aggressor. How unexpected. The man began making excuses, apologies, promises, the pathetic litany of manipulators everywhere. And then words that changed everything. "Han will have your head for this, Kim. You know who I work for. The Han organization. Jae-ho's rivals. The thorn in his side that had been growing more troublesome with each passing year. And this piece of garbage worked for them. Which made the woman." "You're his wife," Jae-ho said, eyes narrowing as he turned to her. She nodded, wiping tears with the back of her hand. "Amara," she said, as if her name was the only part of herself she still owned completely. Jae-ho should have walked away, should have taught the man a quick lesson and disappeared into the neon glow of Gangnam. Instead, he found himself making a decision that would tear his carefully constructed world apart. "You have a choice," he told her, gaze never leaving her face. "Stay with him and continue this life, or come with me and start again." Her eyes widened, disbelief warring with desperate hope. "You don't even know me." "I know enough," Jae-ho replied. He knew the look of someone drowning in a life they never chose. Knew it from his own reflection 20 years ago. She glanced at her husband, at the man who had promised to love her and chosen to control her instead. Then back at Jae-ho, the stranger offering dangerous salvation. "If I come with you, what do you want in return?" "Always a price." There was always a price. "Nothing," Jae-ho said, surprising himself with the truth in the word. "Consider it a business decision. Taking something valuable from the Hans. A lie, but a necessary one. For both of them." Her husband began threatening then. Promises of what would happen when Han found out. How they'd hunt her down. How no one defied the Han organization and lived. Jae-ho signaled to his men who had materialized from the shadows. They restrained her husband with practiced efficiency. "Last chance," he told Amara. "Choose." She straightened her spine, gathered what remained of her dignity. "I choose life," she said. Jae-ho nodded, then instructed his men to release her husband with a warning. Not finished. That would come later when the time was right, when it would hurt Han the most. "Come," he said to Amara, already striding toward the black Bentley waiting at the curb. "We need to move quickly." She followed, clutching the remains of her torn jacket around herself like armor. In the car's interior light, Jae-ho saw the fear in her eyes, the wariness, but also something else. something that mirrored his own carefully hidden wounds. "Where are we going?" she asked as the car pulled away, her voice small but steady. "Somewhere safe," he replied, staring out at the city that had made him a monster and made her a victim. "Somewhere he can't find you." If you're feeling the tension building already, this story is for you. Like and subscribe now for more tales of broken people finding strength in unexpected places. Drop a comment if you've ever witnessed someone choosing a new beginning over a familiar pain. Now let's continue with their journey. The Jade Dragon apartment complex rose 40 stories above Gangnam, a gleaming spire of glass and steel where Jae-ho housed his most trusted lieutenants. His private fortress in a city he controlled through fear and money. The security was unparalleled: facial recognition, fingerprint scanners, armed guards disguised as doormen. The building itself was a testament to his power, to the empire he'd built from nothing but ruthless determination. He placed Amara on the 38th floor, 2 below his own penthouse. Close enough to protect, far enough to maintain the distance he needed. The apartment was one of several he kept furnished but empty, safe houses for emergencies, for visitors who needed discretion, for situations like this one that he couldn't have anticipated but had prepared for nonetheless. "You'll be safe here," he told her as they entered. The apartment was minimalist but luxurious. White leather furniture, glass tables, art pieces selected for investment rather than aesthetic. "No one enters this building without my approval." Amara stood in the center of the living room, looking small and lost among the expensive furnishings. Her arms remained wrapped around herself, less from cold than from the instinctive need to hold herself together. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, her voice stronger now that they were alone. The truth this time. Not some line about business decisions. Jae-ho considered lying. It would be easier, safer. But something about her demanded honesty. "I don't know," he admitted. It was the most truthful thing he'd said in years. "Get some rest. There are clothes in the bedroom. Food in the refrigerator. Tomorrow we'll talk more." He left before she could ask another question he couldn't answer. Before he could examine too closely the impulse that had led him to intervene, to bring her here, to upend the careful balance he'd maintained for 2 decades. His men whispered, of course. The dragon had never brought a woman to the Jade before. Never personally intervened in a street altercation. Never risked war with the Hans over something so trivial as a battered wife. "She must be special," they murmured when they thought he couldn't hear, huddled in the security room, watching monitors that showed every corner of the building. "He must be interested in her," they concluded, because men like them couldn't conceive of any other reason to protect a woman. Men who had followed Jae-ho long enough to know his reputation with women: cold, transactional, never emotionally involved. The man who had famously turned away Korea's most beautiful actress when she'd offered herself as payment for his protection of her brother. The man who had rejected marriage proposals from daughters of the wealthiest families in Seoul. Jae-ho let them talk, let them wonder. Their speculation was safer than the truth, that for the first time in decades he'd acted on impulse, on something dangerously close to compassion, on a memory of himself at 16, broken and bleeding, wishing someone would appear from the darkness and offer escape. In his penthouse that night, Jae-ho stood at the window, watching Seoul spread before him like a glittering carpet. 20 years he'd spent climbing from the streets to this view. 20 years of calculating every move, of eliminating every weakness, of building walls around himself so high and so thick that nothing could breach them. And now, because of one woman's defiant eyes in a dark alley, he'd introduced a variable he couldn't control. His phone buzzed with a message from his head of security. Amara's husband had been identified: David Park, American-born son of Korean immigrants, recently appointed as Han's liaison to international partners, a rising star in their organization, a man whose humiliation would not go unanswered. Jae-ho's thumb hovered over the button that would order Park's elimination. One command and the problem would disappear. But something stopped him, not mercy but strategy. The man's death now would spark immediate retaliation from Han, would force Jae-ho to explain his interest in Park's wife, would transform a personal matter into organizational warfare. No, better to wait, to gather information, to understand exactly what he was dealing with before making his move. Instead, he sent instructions for complete surveillance on Park. Every movement, every call, every meeting, and doubled the security on the Jade Dragon, with specific attention to the 38th floor. Days passed. Amara remained in the apartment, a ghost behind bulletproof glass. Jae-ho watched her through security feeds, a violation of privacy he justified as necessary protection. Watched as she explored the space that had become both sanctuary and prison. As she stood at the windows for hours, staring out at a city she didn't know. As she slept fitfully on the too large bed, curled tight as if making herself a smaller target. Her bruises faded from purple to yellow to nothing. But the wounds beneath her skin, those remained fresh. Jae-ho recognized the signs. The way she flinched at sudden movements. How she positioned herself with exits in view. The practiced smallness of someone who had learned that taking up space invited trouble. On the 4th day, she asked to leave. "I can't stay here forever," she said when he visited, her voice stronger than it had been in the alley. "I need something to do, a purpose." Jae-ho studied her. She'd found clothes in the apartment that almost fit. A silk blouse that hung loose on her frame, tailored pants cuffed at the ankles. Her hair was pulled back in a simple style, her face bare of makeup, revealing a natural beauty that made something in his chest tighten uncomfortably. "What did you do before?" he asked, not needing to specify before what. Before her life had been reduced to surviving a husband's rage. "I was a designer," she said, something flickering in her eyes. Pride, maybe, or nostalgia for a self she'd lost. "Fashion. I had a small label in New Orleans before I met David. Before I—" She trailed off, but the unspoken words hung in the air. "Before I gave it up for him. Before I became his possession rather than my own person." He gave her work at the Diamond's front desk. Not charity, he could tell she was too proud for handouts. A legitimate job at his most profitable club, where he could ensure her safety without making her feel like a prisoner. Where she could interact with others without being exposed to potential threats. Where he could watch over her without making his interest too obvious. The first time she entered the Diamond Club as an employee rather than a victim was a study in contrasts. The torn dress replaced by a simple black suit that Jae-ho had ordered for her. The tear-stained face now composed, chin lifted slightly as she took in the opulent interior she'd only glimpsed during her escape. The club manager, a thin man named Hyunwoo who had been with Jae-ho since the beginning, watched her with barely concealed suspicion. "She will work the front desk," Jae-ho told him in Korean, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Treat her with respect." "Of course, boss," Hyunwoo replied, bowing slightly. "But she doesn't speak Korean. How will she?" "She'll learn," Jae-ho interrupted. "Until then, most of our clients speak English." Hyunwoo nodded, but his expression remained doubtful. "And what should I tell the others about her situation?" "Tell them nothing," Jae-ho said coldly. "Her situation is not their concern. But of course, in an organization built on information and loyalty, secrets didn't stay secrets for long." By the end of her first week, everyone in the Diamond Club knew that the beautiful black American woman at the front desk was under the dragon's protection. That she lived in the Jade Dragon. That she had somehow caught Jae-ho Kim's interest when so many others had failed. He watched her through the security cameras in his office. Watched as she straightened her spine when customers stared too long. As she learned phrases in Korean to greet the regulars. As she developed a polite but distant smile for men who lingered at her desk. As she slowly, cautiously began to breathe again. Min-jun, Jae-ho's right hand for 15 years, warned him repeatedly. Standing in Jae-ho's office while security feeds showed Amara organizing reservation books at the front desk, Min-jun's concern was palpable. "She could be a spy," he said, his voice low even though they were alone. "The Hans could be using her against us. You're taking an unnecessary risk, brother." Jae-ho dismissed his concerns with a cold stare, one that had silenced far more dangerous men. If Han wanted to plant someone in our organization, he wouldn't choose a woman his lieutenant had publicly mistreated. He's smarter than that. Perhaps that's what they want you to think, Minjun persisted, his loyalty overriding his fear of Jae-ho's displeasure. A calculated move to gain your sympathy, to exploit your... He stopped, perhaps realizing he was approaching dangerous territory. My what? Jae-ho asked, his voice dangerously soft. Minjun hesitated, then bowed slightly. Nothing, boss. I spoke out of turn. But the words hung unspoken between them. My weakness, my blind spot, my heart. The truth was more complicated. Jae-ho had investigated thoroughly, had set his best people to uncovering everything about Amara Jackson, 27, from New Orleans. Fashion design graduate from Parsons who'd met her husband, David Park, during his business trip to the States. Whirlwind romance. Marriage after 6 months. Relocation to Korea with promises of connecting her to Seoul's fashion industry. Then isolation, control, escalating cruelty, a familiar pattern to anyone who'd seen it before. Her passport had disappeared shortly after their arrival in Korea. Her bank accounts were in his name. Her phone calls and emails monitored. Classic tactics of an abuser in a foreign country, where the victim had no support system, no understanding of the language or culture, no way to escape. She wasn't a spy. She was a prisoner who'd been offered a key. And Jae-ho, against every instinct he'd cultivated over 20 blood-soaked years, found himself invested in her freedom. The first incident came 3 weeks after her arrival at the Diamond. One of the younger members, Taeyong, cornered her in the supply room. A brash kid, barely 25, trying to prove himself worthy of the organization. Suggested she must have done something to deserve what her husband did. Implied she could earn her keep in other ways than working the front desk. Jae-ho saw it happen on the security feed. Saw Amara's face drain of color. Saw her press herself against the wall, as if trying to disappear into it. Saw Taeyong's smirk, his hand reaching to touch her face. Before the boy's fingers could make contact, Jae-ho was moving. Down the stairs from his office, through the crowded club floor, into the back corridor where supply rooms lined the wall. He didn't run. The dragon of Gangnam never ran. But he moved with purpose, with barely contained fury, with a cold determination that made staff members scatter from his path. When he reached the supply room, Taeyong had Amara backed into a corner, her eyes wide with fear but her chin still lifted defiantly. The boy was speaking in low Korean, assuming she couldn't understand the crude suggestions he was making. Step away from her, Jae-ho said quietly in Korean, his voice carrying more menace than a shout ever could. Taeyong froze, then turned slowly, the color draining from his face as he realized who had spoken. Boss, I know exactly what you were just doing, Jae-ho interrupted, switching to English. Amara, please return to your post. I need to speak with Taeyong privately. She hesitated, her eyes darting between them. Nothing happened. I know, Jae-ho said, more gently than anyone had heard him speak in years. Please, I just need a moment. She nodded, slipping past them both, careful not to touch either man as she left the room. Jae-ho waited until the door closed behind her, then turned his full attention to Taeyong, who was visibly trembling now. Boss, I didn't know she was so important to you, he stammered. I thought she was just what? Jae-ho's voice was soft, curious almost, as if genuinely interested in the answer. Just a woman, Taeyong finished lamely. Just a foreigner. Just a possession, Jae-ho suggested, nodding as if they were having a philosophical discussion. Just a thing to be used and discarded. Is that how you see women, Taeyong? As things? The young man swallowed hard, unsure how to answer. Jae-ho didn't wait for him to figure it out. You have 2 options, he said calmly. You can transfer to our operation in Incheon, the fish processing plant. Far from here, far from the women you clearly don't know how to respect. Or you can leave the organization entirely. Taeyong's eyes widened in horror. The fish plant was where careers went to die. Where those who had failed Jae-ho but weren't worth killing were sent to fade into obscurity. Boss, please. It was just a mistake. It won't happen again. You're right about that, Jae-ho agreed. Because you won't be here. Incheon or nothing, Taeyong. Choose now. Incheon. The young man whispered, defeated. Good choice. Be gone by morning. And Taeyong. Jae-ho stepped closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. If I ever hear that you've disrespected another woman, in any capacity, you'll wish I'd chosen the second option for you today. Are we clear? Taeyong nodded frantically. Yes, boss. Crystal clear. Jae-ho left without another word, returning to his office where he could watch the security feeds. Amara was back at the front desk, her hands steady as she arranged reservation cards, her face composed. But he could see the tension in her shoulders, the slight tremor in her movements when she thought no one was watching. The whispers changed after that. Now they said the dragon had found a new obsession, that the Ice King was finally thawing, that the man who'd rejected every woman who'd ever pursued him had finally found his weakness. Jae-ho ignored them all. He wasn't obsessed. He was curious. It had been so long since anything had surprised him. And Amara, everything about her was unexpected, like the way she left a cup of coffee outside his office door each morning. Black, no sugar, exactly how he preferred it. She never mentioned it, never lingered to ensure he found it. Just left it there, a small act of gratitude or perhaps connection, before continuing with her work. He never thanked her, never acknowledged the small kindness, but he found himself waiting for it. Found himself disappointed on the one morning it didn't appear. He sent his driver to check on her that day, only to discover she'd fallen ill. A fever, the housekeeper at the Jade Dragon reported. Nothing serious, but enough to keep her in bed. Without thinking, he sent his personal physician. Then food from his favorite restaurant. Then books to keep her occupied. He told himself it was practical. A sick employee couldn't work. But the truth lurked beneath his justifications, unwelcome and persistent. When she returned to work 2 days later, something had changed. The slightest softening around her eyes when she saw him, a ghost of a smile that vanished too quickly, and worst of all, the fragile hope he felt in response. Dangerous, foolish, weakness creeping in where he'd sworn never to allow it. Thank you, she said quietly when he passed her desk that morning. For the doctor. The food. The books. He nodded once, not trusting himself to speak. Not here, not in public, not where his men could see whatever might show on his face. But that evening, as his driver took them both back to the Jade Dragon, the usual silence between them felt different. Charged with unspoken words, with questions neither of them dared to ask. Why did you do it? She finally said, as the city lights blurred past the tinted windows. Send the doctor. The food. You didn't have to. He continued staring straight ahead, his profile sharp against the passing lights. You're under my protection, he said simply. That includes your health. Is that all it is? She pressed, a boldness in her voice that hadn't been there before. Protection? Obligation. Jae-ho turned to look at her then, really look at her. In the dim light of the car's interior, her eyes were luminous, her skin glowing with the last traces of fever. She was beautiful, yes, but it was more than that. She was alive in a way that few people in his world ever allowed themselves to be. Honest, direct, undiminished by the cruelty she had endured. Does it matter what it is? He asked quietly. Yes, she said simply. It matters to me. He had no answer for that. No answer that he was willing to give even to himself. So he turned away again, back to the safety of the cityscape rushing past, back to the comfort of distance and silence. Jae-ho had built his empire on isolation. Had risen to power precisely because he had nothing to lose, no one to protect, nothing that could be used against him. Women had tried and failed to breach his defenses for years. Daughters of powerful families offering alliances through marriage. Beautiful actresses seeking protection or patronage. even rival bosses offering their sisters as peace treaties. He'd rejected them all without hesitation. Love was for fools. Attachment was weakness. Family was liability. These truths had kept him alive and untouchable for 2 decades. And yet, here he was, watching security footage of Amara organizing files at the front desk, wondering what she'd look like if she truly smiled, if she ever felt safe enough to laugh without restraint. Winter deepened. Amara had been under his protection for nearly 3 months when the first threat arrived. A black envelope delivered to the Diamond's front entrance. Inside, a photograph of Amara entering the apartment complex. On the back, 2 words written in red ink, "Mine still." Jae-ho doubled her security without telling her why. Assigned Song-min, his most trusted soldier, as her personal guard. Increased surveillance on known Han territories. But the threats continued. Photographs of Amara shopping, leaving work, even sleeping through her bedroom window. Each one a promise that her husband hadn't forgotten, hadn't forgiven. The anger that filled Jae-ho surprised even him. Cold, calculated strategy he understood. This was different. This burned hot and desperate. This made him want to tear Seoul apart brick by brick until he found the man and ended him. This made his hands shake when he thought of Amara's fear returning. He began driving her himself, from the apartment to work and back again. His Bentley drawing stairs as it pulled up to the club entrance each evening. The Dragon of Gangnam, playing chauffeur to a woman who barely spoke above a whisper. The rumors spread like wildfire through Seoul's underworld, that the untouchable Jae-ho Kim had finally been touched, that the man who rejected all had finally found someone he couldn't reject. During those drives, something grew between them, fragile as spider silk, strong as steel wire. She told him about New Orleans, where she'd grown up, about the grandmother who had raised her after her parents died, about studying fashion design, about the small boutique she'd opened with money saved from 3 different jobs, about meeting David at a charity gala, about being swept off her feet by his charm and attention, about how quickly charm had turned to control, then control to intimidation, how she'd followed him to Korea believing his promises of change, only to find herself trapped in a foreign country, her passport missing, her money controlled, her contacts with the outside world severed one by one. "You must think I'm stupid," she said one night, staring out at Seoul's glittering skyline as they sat in traffic. To fall for it, to not see what he was until it was too late. "No," Jae-ho said, his voice uncharacteristically gentle. "I think you're human. I think you wanted to believe in something good." She turned to him then, her eyes searching his face as if seeing him for the first time. "And what do you believe in, Jae-ho Kim?" He had no answer. Had stopped believing in anything but power and survival long ago. But something about her question made him want to find an answer that wouldn't disappoint her. Jae-ho offered little of himself in return for her confidences. His words had always been weapons or walls, never bridges. But sometimes, when the lights of Gangnam streaked across her face, when the intimacy of the car's interior made it feel like they were the only 2 people in Seoul, he found himself speaking of his childhood in the slums, his mother's struggle with addiction, his father's disappearance, the hunger that had driven him to join the street gangs at 14. He told her about the foster home after his mother's overdose, about the beatings, about the night he'd finally fought back and fled to the streets, about being taken in by old Kim, the original dragon of Gangnam, who had seen something in the half-starved 16-year-old with dead eyes and quick hands. "You became a survivor to survive," she said once, her voice so soft he almost missed it. "I became a ghost." The truth of those words haunted him for days, made him see his empire differently, not as a testament to his strength, but as a fortress built by a scared child who had never stopped running. On her birthday, he left a package on her desk. Inside, a set of professional-grade sketching pencils and a leather-bound drawing pad. He hadn't mentioned the gift, hadn't even signed it. But that evening, he found a folded paper on his desk, a sketch of the Seoul skyline as seen from his office. Perfect in every detail, capturing not just the buildings but the feeling of standing above the city, of looking down on a world that had once tried to crush him. In the corner, two simple words, "Thank you." He kept that drawing locked in his desk drawer. On bad days, the days when darkness threatened to swallow him whole, he would look at it, remind himself that creation existed alongside destruction, that beauty could grow even in his world of thorns. Spring arrived, painting Seoul in cherry blossoms and new beginnings. Amara bloomed too. The woman who had arrived terrified now walked with quiet confidence. She'd made friends among the staff, learned enough Korean to joke with the bartenders, started designing outfits for some of the club hostesses, her talent earning respect where her connection to Jae-ho had only brought suspicion. And Jae-ho? He was losing the battle against his own heart. The walls he'd built over decades were crumbling, and he couldn't find the will to repair them. He found excuses to be where she was, found himself smiling, actually smiling, when she entered a room, found his thoughts drifting to her when he should have been focused on business. Min-jun confronted him on a rainy April evening. "This has gone on long enough, brother. The men talk. Our enemies talk. They say the great Jae-ho Kim has been leashed by a foreign woman. That you're distracted. Weak." They stood in Jae-ho's office, rain lashing against the floor-to-ceiling windows, the lights of Seoul blurred into watercolor smudges. Min-jun's face was tight with concern, with loyalty that bordered on desperation. "Han is using this against you," Min-jun continued when Jae-ho remained silent, "telling everyone you've lost your edge, that you're ruled by your—" He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "Your infatuation." The old Jae-ho would have silenced Min-jun for such words, would have reminded him, painfully, of the hierarchy between them. Instead, he stared out at the rain-soaked city and asked, "And what if they're right?" The question shocked them both, hung in the air between them, a confession Jae-ho hadn't intended to make. For a moment, Min-jun's face revealed naked surprise, before carefully composing itself again. "Then we have a problem," Min-jun said finally, "because this organization wasn't built on sentiment. It was built on power, on fear, on the understanding that Kim Jae-ho cannot be touched because he has nothing to lose." "And now I do," Jae-ho said softly. It wasn't a question. Min-jun's expression softened, just slightly. "I've been with you since we were street soldiers together. I've seen you rise from nothing to rule this city. I would die for you without hesitation." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "But this woman, she makes you vulnerable in ways our enemies will not hesitate to exploit." "Leave me," Jae-ho said, suddenly tired of the conversation, tired of the truth in Min-jun's words, tired of the conflict between the man he had been and the man he found himself becoming. That night, Jae-ho stood on his penthouse balcony, rain soaking through his shirt, thinking about choices. For 20 years, he'd believed emotion was the enemy, that connections were chains that would only drag him down. Now he wasn't so sure. Now he wondered if perhaps he'd been wrong all along. If the strength he'd sought in isolation might actually be found in connection. If the man who needed no one was not more powerful, but merely more alone. The confrontation came without warning. 3 of Han's men, waiting in the parking garage when Amara left work. If Song-min hadn't been with her, if Jae-ho hadn't installed those extra cameras, if the security team hadn't responded so quickly. But they had. By the time Jae-ho arrived, the situation was under control, and Amara was shaking in Song-min's car. A cut above her eye, the only physical damage. The psychological damage was another matter entirely. Her eyes had gone distant, retreated to that place victims go when the world becomes too much to bear. Jae-ho knew that place. He'd lived there for years as a child, had built his entire empire to ensure he never had to return. He knelt beside the open car door, rain plastering his hair to his forehead, and did something he hadn't done since his mother died. He reached out, took her trembling hand in his, held on as if he could anchor her to the present through sheer force of will. "Amara," he said, her name like a prayer on his lips. "Amara, look at me. You're safe. I'm here." When her eyes finally focused on his face, when her fingers tightened around his, something inside Jae-ho broke open. A dam he'd built against all feeling, all weakness, all love, crumbling in an instant. In its place, something new and terrifying and exhilarating rushed in. Something he had no name for, no defense against. He took her to his penthouse that night, not for the reasons his men might have assumed, but because he couldn't bear to let her out of his sight, couldn't trust anyone else to keep her safe, couldn't face the thought of her alone with her fear. She slept in his bed while he kept vigil in a chair by the window, watching the city that had betrayed them. When she woke crying from nightmares, he was there. Awkward, uncertain, but there. When dawn broke over the horizon, painting the room in gold, they sat together in silence, something unspoken growing between them. It was Amara who finally gave it voice. "Why did you save me that night? You didn't know me. I meant nothing to you." The question hung in the air between them, demanding truth after months of careful distance. Jae-ho stared at his hands. Hands that had done so much harm, hands that now ached to comfort rather than hurt. "I saw myself in you," he finally said, the words raw in his throat. "Not as I am now, but as I was then, trapped, afraid, fighting to survive in a world built to destroy you." He told her then what he'd never told anyone, about the foster home after his mother's death. The man who was supposed to protect him but became his tormentor instead. The night Jae-ho had finally fought back, 16 and terrified, leaving the man unconscious in a pool of blood. How he'd run to the streets and promised himself he'd never be vulnerable again. Never trust. Never love. Never need. "I built this empire so no one could ever hurt me again," he confessed. "Became the person I am so I wouldn't have to fear others like him. And then I saw you in that alley, and suddenly all of it felt empty." The silence that followed was heavy with decades of pain, with possibilities neither of them had dared imagine. Amara moved first, crossed the distance between them, placed her hand against his cheek as if he were something precious rather than something to fear. "We're both still running," she whispered. "Maybe it's time we stopped." The kiss that followed wasn't gentle. Couldn't be, not with the storm of emotions behind it. Years of loneliness, months of longing, the desperate need to feel something, anything beyond the pain they both carried. When they finally broke apart, breathing hard, Jae-ho rested his forehead against hers and whispered words he'd sworn never to say. "I need you." 3 words. 3 words to shatter 20 years of solitude. The organization erupted when word spread. Some approved the boss was human after all. Some feared change. What would this mean for business? And some plotted surely a lovesick Jae-ho would be easier to overthrow. Min-jun's betrayal cut deepest. His lieutenant, his brother in all but blood, the man who'd fought beside him for 15 years. "You've lost your edge," Min-jun accused during a private meeting in Jae-ho's office, tension crackling between them like electricity. "This woman has made you soft. The Hans are laughing at us. Our own people are questioning your leadership." "Let them question," Jae-ho replied, a new certainty in his voice. "Let them laugh. For the first time in my life, I'm not just surviving, Min-jun. I'm living." The ultimatum came 3 days later. A message delivered by the organization's elders. 7 men who had watched Jae-ho rise from street soldier to leader, who had backed him when old Kim died, who had profited from his cold efficiency for 2 decades. Choose, Amara or the empire he'd built. There was no room in their world for divided loyalties. No place for a leader whose heart belonged to an outsider, especially one connected to their enemies. Jae-ho had faced challenges many times without flinching, had made difficult decisions without remorse, had built his reputation on ruthless decisiveness. But this choice paralyzed him. The empire was his identity, his safety, his life's work. Amara was his redemption, his future, his chance at something more than power and fear. He didn't tell her about the ultimatum, didn't burden her with the weight of his decision. Instead, he took her to a small restaurant in Insadong where no one knew his name, watched her laugh at her own attempts to use chopsticks. listened to her dreams of opening her own design studio someday. For one perfect evening, they were just a man and a woman, sharing a meal, sharing a future that might never exist. That night, holding her as she slept, Jae-ho made his decision. By morning, he had set things in motion. Accounts transferred, properties secured, escape routes planned. He would walk away from everything, the power, the respect, the empire he'd built from nothing. He would choose her, choose love over fear, choose healing over power. But her husband found them first. The confrontation came at dawn. 20 of Han's men, led by Amara's husband himself. They'd had help from inside. Min-jun's final betrayal, delivering building schematics, security codes, patrol schedules. They came with determination and hatred, came for revenge, came to reclaim what they believed was theirs. The security team transformed the pristine penthouse into a stronghold. Through it all, Jae-ho remained calm and focused, with Amara safely hidden in a panic room he'd installed years ago, with everything to lose. When he finally faced her husband, this man who had treated her like property, who had marked her soul with fear, Jae-ho didn't see a rival. He saw himself as he might have become. A man so consumed by control he'd destroyed the only thing worth protecting. "She's mine," Park said, tension radiating from every line of his body as they stood in Jae-ho's office, the battle raging outside the door. "She'll always be mine. Everything she is, I created." "She belongs to herself," Jae-ho replied, his voice steady even as adrenaline coursed through him. Something neither of us deserved to learn. The confrontation that followed wasn't what anyone expected. It came from behind Park, from Amara herself. Her voice steady as she stepped forward, no longer hiding, no longer afraid. She had escaped the panic room, had made her way through the chaos, had found her way to this final confrontation as if drawn by invisible threads. "I don't belong to either of you," she said, looking her husband in the eye for the first time since that night in the alley. "I choose my own path now." Park stared, disbelief etched across his face. You wouldn't even exist without me," he said, his voice rising with desperate anger. "I made you. I brought you here. I gave you everything." Amara stepped forward, standing shoulder to shoulder with Jae-ho. "I existed before you. I survived you. And I'll thrive without you." The aftermath was complicated. Park was arrested not for his treatment of Amara, but for his involvement with the Han's illegal operations. Evidence Jae-ho had been gathering for months, delivered anonymously to authorities who had been paid to look the other way until now. The Han organization reeled from the blow, their international connections severed with Park's arrest, their operations under scrutiny from law enforcement suddenly emboldened to move against them. Through it all, Jae-ho waited for the organization's response, waited to be cast out for choosing a woman over loyalty, for the coup that Min-jun had surely planned, for the fall that seemed inevitable. It was Song-min who came to him 3 days later. Song-min who had protected Amara all these months, who had seen what others hadn't, that Jae-ho hadn't grown weaker through love, but stronger, more focused, more. In the family residence, in the very room where I had begun to believe I might find belonging. I wasn't meant to witness it, wasn't meant to hear the ugly truths laid bare. But the old house carried voices, and I had spent a lifetime learning to listen from shadows. "You would destroy everything we built for a foreign whore?" Park's voice, cold and dismissive. "A black servant who spread her legs and made you weak? Do not speak of her again." Kim's voice, deadly quiet. "Not ever. You forget yourself, boy. I made you. I can unmake you just as easily. You made nothing. You ran when things became difficult. You left me to clean up your messes, to rebuild what your recklessness nearly destroyed. I turned your street gang into an empire, and now I'm turning that empire into something that will outlast us both. Because of her." The contempt in Park's voice made me flinch even from my hiding place. "Because she's filled your head with weakness, with legitimacy, with playing by rules made to keep people like us down. No, because I'm tired of living in darkness. Because I want something more than power built on fear. The silence that followed felt like the pause before an execution. When Park spoke again, his voice had changed. No longer angry, but cold with certainty. Choose then, her or your family, her or your birthright, her or the blood that runs in your veins. I didn't wait to hear Kim's answer. Couldn't bear to be the thing that separated him from his heritage, his family, his identity. I slipped away silently, packed only what I had brought originally to the estate, and disappeared into the night. 3 days I managed to evade him. 3 days of cheap hotels and constant movement, using every trick I'd learned from watching Kim's security operations. 3 days of grief so profound it felt like dying, of second-guessing my decision, of wondering if I'd thrown away my one chance at belonging. On the 4th day, he found me. I opened my hotel room door to find Kim Hyun-woo standing in the hallway, looking unlike himself in jeans and a simple button-down shirt. No security detail, no imposing presence. Just a man who looked like he hadn't slept in days. "You left," he said simply. I heard what Park said. "I won't be the reason you lose your family." "You didn't hear my answer." He stepped forward, not touching me but close enough that I could feel the heat of him. "I chose you. I will always choose you." The words I'd waited a lifetime to hear from someone, anyone who meant them, the belonging I'd searched for across continents. "Your family is you now, if you'll have me." Kim Enterprises transformed over the next 2 years, shedding its shadowed past like a snake sheds skin. I headed the new International Relations Department, my languages and diplomatic skills finally recognized with the title and respect they deserved. The blue dress became my trademark at business functions, a reminder of where I'd started and how far I'd come. Not everything was smooth. There were attempts to undermine the new direction, assassination attempts, sabotage from those who preferred the old ways. Park made good on his threat to disown Kim, taking family loyalists with him back to Japan. But for every loss, there were unexpected gains, legitimate business partners relieved to work with a company free from criminal ties, talented employees attracted by the new ethical direction, opportunities that had been closed to an organization with Shadow Dragon's reputation. I created a scholarship foundation for international students facing sudden funding revocation, a direct response to what had happened to me at Oxford. Kim established rehabilitation programs for former employees transitioning from criminal operations to legitimate employment. Together, we built something neither of us had dared imagine possible, a future not defined by past constraints, an identity not limited by others' expectations. On the day Kim Enterprises was officially removed from international watch lists for suspected criminal activity, Kim proposed. Not with grand gestures or public declarations, but privately, in the library of the family residence where we'd first begun to see each other as equals. "What are you doing dressed like that?" he asked as I entered wearing a new blue dress. This one formal, elegant, clearly chosen for a special occasion. I smiled at the echo of our beginning, at how far we'd come from maid and master, from invisible and untouchable. "Becoming your equal in every way," I answered and held out my hand. He took it, and in that simple gesture was everything we'd fought for: recognition, respect, belonging. The validation that I was not defined by the boxes others put me in. That Kim was not limited by the path others had chosen for him. That together, we could rewrite the stories we'd been given and create something entirely our own. The world doesn't make it easy for people like me. Black women who dare to claim their brilliance, who refuse to be diminished, who demand recognition in spaces designed to exclude them. The world doesn't make it easy for people like Kim, men raised in violence who choose to break cycles, who rebuild rather than destroy, who choose vulnerability over power. The world fights against these transformations with everything it has. But sometimes, just sometimes, the world loses. Sometimes blue dresses win against gray uniforms. Sometimes the question, "What are you doing dressed like that?" becomes not an accusation but an invitation to revolution. Be brave enough to wear your blue today. Sometimes the answer changes everything.